The third lash split the skin between Catherine Mercer's shoulder blades like a seam torn in old fabric. Her fingers, already white from gripping the punishment post, began to bleed where the rough wood bit into her palms. The fourth lash came faster than she expected. The sound reached her ears a full second before the pain registered a sharp crack that echoed off the false-fronted buildings surrounding the town square. Then the fire spread across her back in a wave that made her teeth clench so hard she tasted copper. She was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The numbers were all that kept the darkness at the edges of her vision from rushing in and swallowing her whole. The fifth lash made her body jerk forward involuntarily. Behind her, she heard a girl's voice break into a sob. Nady, the 15-year-old Arapaho girl for whom Kate was enduring this. The girl whose terrified eyes had reminded Kate so powerfully of her own daughter that she had stepped forward without thinking, without planning, driven by an instinct she thought had died 9 months ago, in a small bedroom that still smelled of lavender and sickness. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We should start at the beginning, or at least 30 minutes earlier, when Catherine Mercer still believed she could live out the rest of her days without feeling anything at all. The winter of 1884 had come early to Salvation Ridge, Wyoming territory. Snow already covered the ground in a thick blanket that muffled sound and made the world seem smaller, more contained. Kate had walked the 3 miles from her farmstead into town with her head down and her black wool coat buttoned to her throat, carrying an empty oil can that needed filling and a short list of supplies she could barely afford. She had not spoken to another human being in 6 days. This was not unusual. Since the death of her daughter Julia, and before that the death of her husband Thomas, Kate had withdrawn from the world like a hand pulling back from a flame. The farmstead where she lived alone sat at the edge of the settlement, far enough from town that she could go weeks without seeing another soul if she planned her trips carefully. She preferred it that way. Isolation was a kind of armor. It kept the pity out. It kept the questions out. It kept everything out except the memories, and those she had learned to live with, the way a person learns to live with a permanent injury. The general store was owned by Silas Drummond, a man whose girth spoke of prosperity and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. He sold everything from nails to laudanum, from flour to rifle ammunition. When Kate entered shaking snow from her boots, he looked up from his ledger and gave her the smallest of nods. No warmth, no greeting. Just acknowledgement that a customer had entered and money might change hands. Kate was used to this. She had been invisible even before the deaths, a quiet woman, a serious woman, a woman who did not laugh at jokes or gossip at church socials. Now she was something else entirely, a ghost, a reminder of loss. People looked away when she approached as if grief might be contagious. She was counting coins at the counter, her oil can already filled, and waiting when the commotion outside began. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy being dragged. Then a girl's cry, high and desperate. Kate looked up. Through the frost-covered window, she could see a crowd gathering in the square. Her first instinct was to turn away, to finish her business and leave before whatever was happening pulled her in. She had enough trouble of her own. The world outside her farmstead was full of injustice and cruelty, and she had learned that one person could do nothing about it except be crushed under its weight. But then she saw the girl. Nady was small for 15, with long black hair that hung in 2 braids and eyes that were too large for her thin face. 2 men held her arms, their fingers digging into her buckskin sleeves hard enough to leave bruises. She was trying to pull away her feet slipping in the snow, her breath coming in visible gasps. Behind her stood Mrs. Murphy, a dried-up woman of 60, whose mouth was a permanent line of disapproval. Kate found herself moving toward the door. Her hand reached for the handle before her mind had fully decided to act. The cold air hit her face like a slap as she stepped outside. The crowd had formed a loose circle around the girl, perhaps 20 people, maybe more. Miners and their wives, shopkeepers, a few ranch hands who had come to town for supplies, all of them staring, all of them silent except for Mrs. Murphy, whose voice cut through the winter air like a saw through green wood. "She took 3 pounds of flour from my back storage," the old woman was saying, pointing a gnarled finger at Nady. "I saw her with my own eyes, snuck in through the back door while I was helping a customer." Nady shook her head violently. "No, I gave you 15 cents. You paid for 1 pound, Mrs. Murphy snapped. "You took 3. That's theft, plain and simple." Silas Drummond had emerged from his store wiping his hands on his apron. He was not the law in Salvation Ridge. There was no official law this far from the territorial capital, but he was the closest thing to authority the town possessed. He owned the largest business. He extended credit. He had a voice that people listened to, and he knew it. What seems to be the trouble? His voice was deceptively mild, the tone of a man who already knew the answer but wanted to hear it, said aloud. Mrs. Murphy repeated her accusation. Nady repeated her denial, her voice cracking. The crowd murmured. Kate stood at the edge of the circle, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs in a way it had not done since the night Julia died. She knew what was coming. She had seen it before. 3 years ago, a young Arapaho man had been accused of stealing a horse. They had whipped him in this very square 10 lashes that had left him unconscious and bleeding in the snow. The fact that the horse had later been found wandering loose, never stolen at all, had not resulted in any apology or compensation. The incident was simply forgotten by everyone except the young man who had left the territory and never returned. Drummond was stroking his chin, making a show of considering the situation. Did anyone see this theft occur besides Mrs. Murphy? No one spoke up. Did anyone see the girl pay for the flour? Again, silence. Kate's throat was dry. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to return to her farmstead and her solitude and her grief. She wanted to be anywhere but here, watching this unfold. But Nady turned her head, scanning the crowd with desperate eyes, looking for a friendly face for anyone who might speak on her behalf. And when those eyes met Kate's, something happened. The girl's face seemed to shift, to change. For just a moment, Kate did not see Nady at all. She saw Julia, her daughter, her beautiful, kind-hearted daughter, who had been just 15 when the consumption took her, whose last words had been, "Mama, don't be sad." The world tilted. Kate's vision blurred. When it cleared, she saw Nady again, just a frightened child alone in a hostile crowd. Drummond was speaking. "According to the regulations we established for this settlement, the penalty for theft is 10 lashes delivered publicly." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Unless the accused can make immediate restitution of twice the value of the stolen goods," Mrs. Murphy snorted. "She's got no money. None of them do. Then we proceed with the punishment." Drummond gestured to 2 men standing nearby. "Bring the post." They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly having done this before. The punishment post was kept in a shed behind the general store. It was a simple thing, a thick wooden pole driven deep into the ground with an iron ring near the top where ropes could be secured. They dragged it out and positioned it in the center of the square. Nady began to struggle in earnest now, her denials turning to pleas. "Please, I have brothers. They will pay. Please just give me time." "No time for thieves," Drummond said flatly. "Tie her." Kate watched as they pulled Nady toward the post. The girl's feet left tracks in the snow. Her hands reached out, grasping at nothing. And in that moment, Kate stopped thinking entirely. Her body moved on its own, carrying her forward through the crowd. People parted surprised. She walked until she stood directly in front of Silas Drummond, so close she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Wait," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rusty from disuse, but surprisingly steady. Drummond's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have something to add?" Every eye in the square was on her now. She could feel their stares like physical weight. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together in front of her body. "Let me take it," she said. "The punishment. Let me take it instead of her." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause. Somewhere far off, a crow cawed once, then went quiet. Drummond stared at her. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Kate's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "She's a child. I'm a grown woman. If someone must be punished, let it be me." "That's not how this works," Drummond began, but there was a new light in his eyes. Interest, curiosity, the chance to exert power over someone who had always kept herself apart from the town's social hierarchies. 10 lashes, Kate said, her voice growing stronger. "I'll take all 10. Just let her go." Mrs. Murphy made a sound of disgust. "This is ridiculous. The girl is the thief." But Drummond was considering it. Kate could see the calculation behind his eyes. To whip an Arapaho girl was one thing, a reinforcement of the existing order. But to whip the widow of Thomas Mercer, a man who had been well respected despite his common origins, a woman who had kept to herself and never caused trouble, that was different. That was a demonstration of authority that would be talked about for months. "Very well," he said finally. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "If Mrs. Mercer wishes to take the girl's punishment, I see no reason to deny her request. A debt is a debt regardless of who pays it." The crowd murmured with shock. And something else, something that might have been excitement. This was entertainment, a break in the monotony of winter. They released Nady, who stumbled forward, her face a mask of confusion and horror. Kate did not look at her. If she looked at the girl, she might lose her nerve. Instead, she walked steadily to the post. Her hands went to the buttons of her coat. She removed it, slowly, folding it with care and setting it on the ground, then her shawl. Then, with fingers that trembled only slightly, she began to unbutton her dress. "Just the back," Drummond said. "We're not savages." Kate loosened the top half of her dress and pulled it down to her waist, leaving her back bare to the winter air. Her chemise she tied around her waist to preserve what modesty she could. The cold bit into her exposed skin, immediately raising gooseflesh. They tied her wrists to the iron ring. The rope was rough hemp, the kind used for hauling freight. It scraped her skin as they pulled it tight. Kate pressed her forehead against the wooden post and closed her eyes. She heard Drummond select the whip. It was a teamster's whip, designed for driving mules. Not the worst instrument that could have been chosen, but bad enough. 10 strokes, Drummond announced to the crowd. "Count them with me." The first lash came without warning. Kate had thought she was prepared, but the pain was unlike anything she had experienced. It was not a single sensation, but many. The initial impact, like a club striking flesh, followed immediately by a burning that spread outward in ripples, then a deep ache that seemed to reach down to the bone. She gasped, but did not cry out. 1, the crowd intoned. The second stroke crossed the first at an angle. Kate's vision went white at the edges. She gripped the post harder, feeling splinters drive into her palms. 2. The third lash was the one that brought the first flashback. Julia lying in her bed, her face flushed with fever, coughing blood into a cloth. The consumption had eaten away at her lungs for 6 months, turning her from a vibrant girl into a frail shadow. Julia saying, "It hurts, Mama. Make it stop hurting." Kate helpless, wringing out cool cloths and whispering useless reassurances. 3. The fourth lash split the skin. Kate felt warmth running down her back and knew it was blood. The crowd had gone quiet now, their earlier excitement giving way to something else. Discomfort, perhaps. The recognition that this was not entertainment after all, but cruelty. 4. The fifth stroke made her body jerk against the ropes. Behind her she heard Nady sobbing, "Please stop! Please, someone stop this!" But no one stopped it. This was justice as Salvation Ridge understood it. This was order. This was the way things were done. 5. Halfway. She could survive this. She had survived worse. She had held her daughter's hand as Julia took her last breath, her body finally surrendering to the disease that had ravaged it. She had stood beside her husband's grave in the rain. She had lived through 9 months of emptiness so profound that some mornings she woke surprised to find herself still breathing. 10 lashes were nothing compared to that. 6. Except they were not nothing. The pain was very real, very present. It filled her entire awareness. There was no room for thought, for memory, for anything except the count. 7. Julia again, younger this time. Julia at 8, laughing as she chased fireflies in the summer twilight. Julia at 10, reading aloud from a book of poems. Julia at 13, helping Kate bake bread flour, dusting her dark hair white. 8. Kate made a sound, a low groan that escaped despite her clenched teeth. She tasted blood in her mouth and realized she had bitten her lip. 9. One more, just one more. She could endure one more. Drummond paused before the final stroke, drawing out the moment. When it came, he put his full weight behind it. The whip caught Kate high on her shoulders, and for a moment everything went black. She sagged against the ropes, held upright only by the bindings on her wrists. 10. They cut her down. Her legs would not hold her, and she fell to her knees in the snow. The cold against her ravaged back was almost a relief, almost. Hands reached for her, trying to help, but she pushed them away. With enormous effort, she got her feet under her and stood. Her dress hung loose around her waist. She pulled it up over her shoulders, not bothering with the buttons, just holding it closed with one hand. Her coat. She needed her coat. She bent to pick it up, and the movement sent fresh agony screaming across her back. She bit down on her lip again and tasted more blood. Nadie was there, tears streaming down her face, trying to help Kate with her coat. The girl's hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage the sleeves. "Why?" Nadie whispered. "Why did you do this?" Kate looked at her, really looked at her. The girl was just a child, frightened and alone and desperate. "Go home," Kate said. Her voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "Go home to your family." Then she turned and began walking. 3 miles back to her farmstead. 3 miles through snow that was starting to fall again. 3 miles with her back screaming and blood soaking through her dress. The crowd parted to let her pass. No one spoke. No one offered help. They simply watched as she walked away, her back straight, despite the pain, her head up, despite the humiliation. The walk took forever. Kate fell twice, once at the edge of town where the road began to slope upward, and once about halfway home where exhaustion made her knees buckle. Both times she lay in the snow for a moment, gathering her strength before forcing herself to rise. The farmstead appeared finally through the falling snow, a small dark shape against the white landscape. Home, such as it was. She made it to the well before her strength gave out completely. Kneeling in the snow, she drew up a bucket of water, icy cold, and used it to rinse the blood from her back as best she could. The cold water on the open wounds was agony of a different kind, sharp and clean. She gasped but did not stop until she had washed away as much blood as she could reach. Inside the house, she lit a lamp with shaking hands. The interior was sparse. She had sold or given away most of the furniture after Thomas died. What remained was functional, nothing more. A table, 2 chairs, a bed, the bare minimum required to exist. Kate made it to the bed and lay down on her stomach, too exhausted to undress properly. The pain was immense, all-consuming, but underneath it, strange and unexpected, was something else. A feeling she had not experienced in 9 months. She felt alive, present, real. For 9 months she had been a ghost going through the motions of existence without truly inhabiting her own skin. The grief had insulated her from everything good and bad, wrapping her in a thick fog through which nothing could penetrate. But pain, it seemed, could cut through anything. Kate lay in the darkness, listening to her own breathing, feeling her heartbeat. And for the first time since Julia died, she cried, not silent tears, but great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body and made her back scream in protest. She cried for Julia. She cried for Thomas. She cried for all the lost days and wasted months. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted, and strangely, impossibly at peace. She did not expect to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her eventually. She drifted into darkness, still lying on her stomach, still wearing her blood-stained dress. She woke to the sound of horses. The light coming through the window was pale and gray, the colorless illumination of early dawn. Kate's back had stiffened during the night, the wounds beginning to scab over. Every movement was torture. She managed to sit up, gasping at the pain, and looked toward the window. 5 riders sat their horses in front of her farmstead silhouettes against the dawn sky. Even in the dim light, Kate could see they were Arapaho, her heart clenched with sudden fear. They had come for revenge. Of course they had. She had humiliated them by taking a punishment meant for one of their own. Or perhaps they thought she had condemned Nady by confirming the town's assumption that Indians were thieves who needed white intervention. Either way, she was alone and defenseless. Kate forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled. Her back screamed. She made her way to the fireplace where Thomas's old shotgun hung on pegs above the mantel. She had never fired it. She was not even sure it still worked. But she took it down with shaking hands and checked that it was loaded. Outside, the 5 men had dismounted. They were walking toward her house, moving with deliberate slowness. Kate stood in her doorway, the shotgun held across her chest. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely keep her grip. The men stopped 20 paces away. The one in front, tall and lean, with a long scar running from his ear to his chin, raised both hands to show they were empty. He said something in his own language, a flowing string of syllables that Kate could not understand. Then he spoke in English, heavily accented but clear. "We come with no weapons. We come in peace." Kate did not lower the gun. "What do you want?" The man gestured behind him. "My brothers. And our sister." That was when Kate saw Nady riding behind the last of the men. The girl slid down from the horse and ran forward, stopping only when the scarred man held up a hand. "We are Nady's family," the man said. "I am Joseph, 2 Rivers they call me." He gestured to each of the other men in turn. "My brothers, Samuel Stone Hand, William Swift Arrow, Daniel Gray Wolf, David White Wolf." Kate's arms were aching from holding the gun. She lowered it slowly, but kept it ready. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" Joseph looked at his brothers. Some silent communication passed between them. Then, as one, all 5 men lowered themselves to their knees in the snow. Kate stared speechless. Joseph looked up at her, his dark eyes holding hers. "What you did yesterday, taking the punishment for our sister. We have never seen such a thing, not from your people, not from anyone. Kate began, then stopped. She did not know how to explain what she had done because she did not fully understand it herself. "You owed us nothing," Joseph continued. "Nady is not your family, not your friend. You did not even know her name, but you stood between her and pain. You took that pain into your own body." Nady stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "May I speak?" she asked Joseph. He nodded. The girl approached Kate slowly as one might approach a wounded animal. She was carrying something, a bundle wrapped in deerskin. "I brought medicine," Nady said. "For your back, herbs that will help it heal." Kate took the bundle automatically. Up close she could see that Nady had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. "I'm so sorry," Nady whispered. "I'm so sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Kate said. "You didn't do anything wrong." The girl's face crumpled. "But I did." And then the truth came spilling out, the whole truth, words tumbling over each other in Nady's haste to confess. She had stolen the flour. Not all 3 pounds, perhaps Mrs. Murphy was prone to exaggeration, but she had taken more than she paid for. She had slipped into the storage room while the old woman was distracted and filled her sack beyond what 15 cents would buy. But there was a reason. There was always a reason. Joseph's son, Little Hawk, was sick, desperately sick. Fever for 5 days, unable to keep food down, growing weaker by the hour. The family had no money for a doctor, no money even for the supplies needed to keep him fed and warm. Nady had been trying to help to bring home enough food to make broth to keep her nephew alive. She had been desperate, and desperation made people do things they would never otherwise consider. "I lied," Nady said, her voice breaking. "When I said I didn't take it, I lied to you, to everyone, and because of my lie, you suffered." Samuel, the largest of the brothers, stepped forward. He carried a leather pouch which he set down in the snow at Kate's feet. When he opened it, Kate saw coins, silver and copper, glinting in the dawn light. $47, Joseph said. "Everything we have. It's not enough. It could never be enough. But it's all we can offer." Kate looked from the money to the 5 kneeling men to Nady's tear-stained face. Her mind was reeling. She had been whipped for a girl who actually was a thief. The injustice of it, the absurdity, the sheer wrongness should have made her angry. But all she felt was a deep, aching sadness. "Stand up," she said quietly. "Please, all of you, stand up." They rose slowly, uncertainty in every movement. Kate looked at Joseph. "Your son. How old is he?" 5 years. The same age Julia had been when she learned to read. The same age she had been when she caught her first fish in the creek behind their old house in Pennsylvania. "Is he going to die?" The question came out more bluntly than Kate intended. Joseph's jaw tightened. Perhaps. Without medicine, without proper food, yes. Perhaps. Kate felt something shift inside her chest. A wall that had been holding back the world began to crack. Not much. Just a hairline fracture. But enough. "Keep your money," she said. "Use it to help your son." "We cannot," Joseph protested. "The debt must be paid. To Mrs. Murphy for the flour, yes, but more than that. To you. What you suffered because of us, because of what Nady did, that debt is beyond money." "Then pay it differently." Kate heard herself speak before she had consciously formed the thought. "Take me to see him, your son. Let me help if I can." All 5 brothers stared at her. "You would do this?" Joseph asked. "After everything, you would help us." Kate looked down at her hands. They were scarred from work, rough and red from the cold. Thomas's hands had been like that. Capable hands. Hands that built things and fixed things and held things together. "I had a daughter," she said. The words came hard, scraping her throat raw. "Julia. She died 9 months ago. The consumption took her slowly over half a year, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing." She looked up, meeting Joseph's eyes. "Your son is 5. If there's something I can do, anything at all, then yes, I want to help." The sun was rising properly now, painting the snow with shades of pink and gold. In that light, Kate saw the expressions on the faces of the 5 brothers shift from suspicion to something else. Wonder, perhaps, or hope. Joseph inclined his head in a gesture of deep respect. "Then we accept your offer, and we make you one in return." He glanced at his brothers, who nodded. "By the laws of our people, one who saves a member of the family saves the entire family. The debt cannot be repaid, but it can be honored. From this day forward, we pledge ourselves to you. Your protection is our duty. Your enemies are our enemies. Your home is our home to defend." "I don't need protection," Kate began, but Joseph shook his head. "It's not about need. It's about honor. Please, let us do this." Kate wanted to refuse. She wanted to send them away and return to her solitude. But looking at their faces, at the earnest determination in their eyes, at Nady still clutching the bundle of healing herbs, she found she could not. "All right," she said finally. "All right." And with those 2 words, everything changed. The wall around Kate's heart, the fortress she had built to keep the world at bay, developed another crack. Light began to seep through warming places that had been frozen for so long she had forgotten what warmth felt like. "Let me get my coat," she said, "and something for the child. I have medicine, from when my daughter was sick." She turned toward the house, then paused. Her back still screamed with every movement, but the pain was bearable. Everything was bearable if it meant saving a child's life. Joseph called after her, "Mrs. Mercer." She looked back. "Thank you," he said simply. Kate nodded and went inside. Behind her, she heard the brothers speaking quietly in their own language. She heard Nadie's lighter voice joining theirs. She heard the stamp of horses' hooves in the snow. She heard for the first time in 9 months the sound of life returning to her world. The reservation, if it could be called such, was not a proper settlement at all. It was a collection of temporary shelters huddled in a shallow valley 3 miles northwest of Salvation Ridge, where the winter wind cut less savagely and a thin stream provided water that had not yet frozen solid. Kate had known it existed, of course. Everyone in the territory knew where the Arapaho had been pushed after the treaties, after the conflicts, after the slow grinding process of displacement that had characterized the past 2 decades. But knowing something exists and seeing it with your own eyes are different things entirely. The shelters were a mix of traditional lodges and makeshift structures built from whatever materials could be scavenged. Canvas old lumber animal hides stretched over bent poles. Smoke rose from cooking fires in thin gray columns that dissipated quickly in the cold air. Children stopped playing to stare as Kate rode into the camp perched awkwardly behind Joseph on his horse. Her back was a constant sheet of pain made worse by every jolt and sway of the animal's gait. They stopped before one of the larger lodges. Joseph dismounted with fluid grace and helped Kate down with surprising gentleness, careful not to touch her injured back. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, and the blood loss from the whipping had left her lightheaded. "This way," Joseph said, pulling back the hide covering that served as a door. Inside, the air was warmer but thick with the smell of sickness. A small fire burned in a central pit, the smoke escaping through a hole at the top of the structure. In the dim light, Kate could make out a figure lying on a pile of blankets and furs. Little Hawk. The boy was tiny, his face flushed with fever, his breathing rapid and shallow. A woman sat beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. She looked up as they entered, her eyes widening when she saw Kate. Joseph spoke to her in their language, his tone gentle but urgent. The woman nodded slowly, never taking her eyes from Kate's face. "This is Morning Star," Joseph said. "She cares for Little Hawk while I work. She does not speak English, but she understands that you have come to help." Kate knelt beside the boy, ignoring the protest from her back. She had done this before so many times with Julia, checking for fever, listening to breathing, looking for signs of illness. Her hands moved automatically, touching the child's forehead, his neck feeling the rapid flutter of his pulse. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. 5 days. The fever came first. Then he stopped eating. Yesterday he began coughing blood. Coughing blood. Kate's heart sank, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was not the slow wasting of consumption that had taken Julia eating away at her lungs month by month until there was nothing left. This was different. The symptoms were acute, the onset rapid. Pneumonia, not tuberculosis. Pneumonia could strike fast, but it could also be beaten if treated quickly enough. "I need light," Kate said, "more light, and water boiled if possible." They brought her what she asked for. In better illumination, she could see the boy more clearly. His lips had a faint blue tinge. His skin was hot to the touch, but his extremities were cold. These were the signs she had learned to recognize during the terrible winter when half the children in her Pennsylvania valley had fallen ill with lung fever. Some had lived, some had died. The difference had often come down to care and medicine and luck. She had supplies in the bundle she had brought from her farmstead. Quinine for the fever, willow bark for pain, honey to soothe the throat. These were the same medicines she had used on Julia when the consumption first took hold before they understood what they were fighting. The medicines had failed then, unable to stop the disease that had already dug its claws too deep. But this time was different. This child's illness was acute, not chronic. There was still a chance. Kate worked with quiet efficiency, mixing the quinine with water and a little sugar to make it more palatable. She held Little Hawk's head while Joseph tilted the cup to the boy's lips, coaxing him to drink a few drops at a time. The child was too weak to resist or even acknowledge what was happening. "He needs warmth," Kate said, "but not too much. The fever has to come down before we can warm him properly. And he needs to eat even just broth, something to give him strength." Morning Star nodded her understanding and slipped out of the lodge. Kate heard her giving instructions to someone outside. Joseph sat across the fire from Kate, his face grave. Will he live? It was the question Thomas had asked her about Julia, his voice breaking on the last word. Kate had told him yes, had believed it with all her heart, right up until the moment it became a lie. "I don't know," she said honestly. "The lung fever is serious. But he's young. Children can be stronger than they look." She paused. "We'll do everything we can." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the boy's labored breathing and the crackle of the fire. Kate found herself studying Joseph's face in the flickering light. The scar that ran from his ear to his chin was old, the skin long since healed into a permanent mark. He had other scars, 2 smaller ones on his hands and forearms, a life written in wounds. "How did you get that scar?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that was rude." Joseph touched his face absently. "No, it's all right." He was quiet for a moment, gathering words. "I was 16. There was a fight. White men from town had come to our camp, drunk and looking for trouble. They found it. My father tried to talk to them to calm them. One of them had a knife." He paused. "I stepped in front of my father. The blade was meant for his throat. It found my face instead. Your father," Kate said, "is he dead? 3 years now. Not from that fight. From sickness. The white man's diseases that our bodies cannot fight." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a deep weariness. Kate looked down at Little Hawk. "I'm sorry for all of it." "Why?" Joseph asked. "You did not cause it. You did not make the laws that pushed us here. You did not bring the sickness." "No, but I benefited from it. My farmstead sits on land that was probably yours once." Joseph was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said finally, "probably. But you did not steal it. You were given it or bought it through the systems your people created. And yesterday you stood in that square and took a whipping for a girl you did not know. That matters more than land." Morning Star returned with a pot of broth, rich with the smell of herbs and meat. Together, Kate and Joseph managed to get a few spoonfuls into Little Hawk. It was not much, but it was something. As the hours passed, Kate tended the boy with the same focus she had once devoted to Julia. She monitored his fever, adjusting the cool cloths when he grew too hot, adding blankets when he began to shiver. She gave him medicine at regular intervals, measuring the doses carefully. She held him when he coughed, supporting his small body so the spasms would not hurt as much. And slowly, incrementally, things began to improve. The fever broke slightly around midday. Little Hawk's breathing, while still labored, became a fraction easier. He opened his eyes once just for a moment and looked at Kate with such confusion that she found herself smiling. "Rest," she told him gently. "Just rest." By late afternoon, Kate's own exhaustion was catching up with her. She had not slept properly in 2 days, and her back was a constant source of agony. Joseph noticed her swaying slightly as she sat. "You need to rest," he said, "and your wounds need attention." "I'm fine," Kate lied. "You're not, and you cannot help Little Hawk if you collapse." He stood, making it clear the discussion was over. "My brothers will watch him. You will come with me." Kate wanted to protest, but she knew he was right. She allowed Joseph to help her to her feet. Outside the lodge, the winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. Samuel was waiting there, the giant of a man who had barely spoken a word since their arrival. He looked at Kate, then at Joseph, and some silent communication passed between them. "Samuel will walk you back to your farmstead," Joseph said. "It is not safe for you to go alone, not in your condition." "I can manage," Kate began. But Samuel simply shook his head. His eyes were kind, she noticed. For such a large man, for someone whose scarred hands and imposing size might inspire fear, his eyes held only gentleness. "I go with you," Samuel said in his halting English. No argument. Kate was too tired to argue anyway. She retrieved her coat and the now empty medicine satchel. Nady appeared, pressing the bundle of healing herbs into Kate's hands again. "For your back," the girl said. "Please use them tonight. They will help." The walk back to the farmstead took longer than the ride out had. Kate's legs felt like they were made of lead, each step requiring conscious effort. Samuel walked beside her, matching his pace to hers, never rushing or showing impatience. He carried himself with an awareness of his own size, as if he had learned long ago to make himself smaller, less threatening. They were perhaps a mile from the reservation when Samuel spoke again. "You are a kind woman," he said, the words coming slowly as he assembled them in an unfamiliar language. "To help little Hawk, to take the whip for Nady." "I'm not kind," Kate said. "I just couldn't stand by and watch." "That is what kind means." They walked in silence for a while. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky fading from orange to purple to the deep blue that comes just before full dark. Kate's farmstead was visible in the distance, a small dark shape against the snow. "Your hands," Kate said suddenly. "The scars. How did that happen?" Samuel looked down at his right hand, flexing the fingers slowly. The scars were extensive, covering most of the palm and winding up past the wrist, old burn scars, the kind that never fully heal. "Fire," he said simply. "When I was boy, 7 years old." He did not elaborate, but something in his voice suggested there was more to the story. Kate waited, giving him space to continue if he wished. "My father," Samuel said after a long pause, "he drank. White man's whiskey. Made him angry. Made him cruel." He flexed his hand again, staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. "One night, very angry, he pushed me into the cooking fire." Kate stopped walking. "That's horrible." Samuel shrugged. "It was long time ago. He is dead now. But the scars—" He held up his hand. "People see scars. They are afraid. They think I am a monster." "I don't think you're a monster," Kate said quietly. Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Hope, perhaps, or relief. "My husband had scars too," Kate continued, surprising herself with the words. She rarely spoke about Thomas to anyone. "On his back, from the war. He was shot twice, lived through both. He was ashamed of them, thought they made him ugly. But I loved those scars. They proved he was a survivor." Samuel's scarred hand came up to touch his chest over his heart. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They resumed walking. By the time they reached Kate's farmstead, full darkness had fallen. Samuel waited while she lit a lamp inside his large frame, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "You will be safe?" he asked. "Here alone?" "I've been alone for months," Kate said. "I'll be fine." But as she watched him walk away, disappearing into the darkness, she realized that for the first time in those months, she did not want to be alone. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. Kate forced herself to eat something, a few spoonfuls of cold stew left over from 2 days ago. Then she turned her attention to her back. She had been avoiding it, dreading what she would find. But Nady's herbs needed to be applied, and infection was a real danger. She heated water and used a piece of mirror propped on the table to try to see the damage. It was worse than she had thought. The whip had left 10 distinct welts, some of them split open and weeping. The skin around the wounds was angry and red. Working awkwardly, Kate cleaned the wounds as best she could and applied the poultice Nady had prepared. The herbs were cool against her burning skin, and within minutes the pain began to subside slightly. Whatever was in the mixture, it worked. Exhausted beyond measure, Kate made her way to the bedroom, but as she approached her bed, she found her steps slowing, then stopping. She stood in the doorway, looking at the small table beside her bed. On it sat the oil lamp she had lit, and beside the lamp, barely visible in the flickering light, was the door to Julia's room. She had not opened that door in 9 months. After Julia died, Kate had simply closed it and locked it, unable to face the emptiness inside. All of Julia's things were still in there: her books, her dolls, her clothes, the bed where she had died. Kate's hand went to the key that hung on a nail beside the door. Her fingers closed around it. She had told Joseph she had medicine that might help little Hawk. Medicine left over from Julia's illness. But that medicine was in Julia's room, in the small wooden chest under her bed. She had to go in. For little Hawk's sake, she had to face what was behind that door. The key turned with a soft click. Kate pushed the door open slowly, half expecting the hinges to shriek from disuse. But they opened smoothly, silently. The room beyond was dark. Kate lifted her lamp and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The bed neatly made with the patchwork quilt Julia had loved. The small desk where Julia had practiced her letters. The shelf of books that Thomas had built, each one chosen carefully during rare trips to larger towns. The dolls lined up on the windowsill, their painted faces smiling eternally. And the smell, faint after all these months, but still there. Lavender, because Julia had loved the sachets Kate made from the plants in her garden. And underneath that, something else. Something that might have been sickness, or might have been just the smell of a room long closed. Kate set the lamp on the desk and knelt beside the bed. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out the wooden chest. Inside were the medicines the doctor had prescribed for Julia. Quinine, yes, but also other things: tincture of opium for the pain, laudanum for when the coughing became unbearable, salves and ointments and powders, each one representing hope that had ultimately proven false. She selected what might be useful for little Hawk and placed it in her satchel. Then she sat on the edge of Julia's bed, her hands resting on the quilt, and let herself remember. Julia laughing as she chased butterflies in the summer meadow behind their old house. Julia reading aloud from her favorite book of fairy tales, her voice rising and falling with dramatic emphasis. Julia helping Kate in the garden, her small hands careful with the delicate seedlings. Julia sick, growing thinner each day, her vibrant energy fading like a candle slowly burning down. And Julia dying. Lying in this very bed, her hand in Kate's, her breathing so shallow it barely moved her chest. Looking up at Kate with eyes that already seemed to be seeing some other place somewhere Kate could not follow. "Mama," Julia had whispered, "don't be sad." Those had been her last words. Don't be sad. As if such a thing were possible. As if a mother could lose her child and simply choose not to grieve. Kate wept. Then sitting on her dead daughter's bed surrounded by her things. But this crying was different from the tears she had shed the night before. Those had been tears of pain and exhaustion and release. These were tears of remembrance, of love, of a grief that would never fully heal but might someday become bearable. When the tears finally stopped, Kate felt lighter somehow, as if some weight she had been carrying had been set down, at least temporarily. She looked around the room one more time, then picked up her lamp and the satchel of medicine. "I'm going to save him, Julia," she said to the empty room. "Your medicines are going to save another child. I think you would like that." She closed the door behind her, but did not lock it. That small act felt significant, though she could not have said exactly why. Kate slept that night without dreams, or at least none that she remembered upon waking. Her back still ached, but the herbs had done their work. The pain was manageable. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Each morning, either Samuel or one of the other brothers would appear at Kate's farmstead just after dawn. They never knocked, never intruded. They simply waited outside until Kate emerged, and then they would walk with her to the reservation where little Hawk lay fighting for his life. The boy improved slowly. The fever came down in increments. His breathing eased. He began to eat small amounts, then larger ones. After 4 days, he opened his eyes and spoke his first words, asking for water in a voice like dry leaves rustling. After a week, he was sitting up, After 10 days, he laughed at something his Uncle William said, a sound like bells chiming. Kate watched this transformation with a mixture of joy and pain. Joy because a child was recovering. Pain because it reminded her so acutely of all the ways Julia had not recovered all the small daily defeats that had led inevitably to the final one. But she kept coming. Every day she walked to the reservation and tended to Little Hawk. And every day her relationship with the 5 brothers deepened in small, almost imperceptible ways. Samuel walked with her most often. The big man seemed to have appointed himself her primary guardian. They rarely spoke during these walks, but Kate found the silence comfortable. He had a presence that was reassuring rather than intimidating. When they did talk, it was in short exchanges that gradually revealed more about each other's lives. William was more challenging. The youngest of the brothers, save for the twins, he had a fire in his eyes that spoke of anger held carefully in check. Kate learned that his father had been killed by prospectors who had accused him falsely of stealing from their claim. William had been 12 at the time. He had wanted revenge then and still wanted it now, though he held himself back for the sake of his brothers and sister. The twins Daniel and David were almost impossible to tell apart until you learned to look for the scars. Daniel had a mark across his forehead from a childhood accident. David had a similar scar on his left cheek. They spoke in half sentences, often finishing each other's thoughts. They had learned English from a missionary who had passed through their camp years ago, and they spoke it better than their older brothers. But it was Joseph who Kate found herself talking to most often. The eldest brother had a gravity about him, a weight of responsibility that she recognized because she had seen it in Thomas. He was the leader, the decision-maker, the one who held the family together through will and determination. On the 14th night after Kate had first come to the reservation, a snowstorm blew in from the north. It came fast and fierce, the kind of storm that could kill anyone caught unprepared. Kate had stayed late with Little Hawk, monitoring a slight uptick in his fever, and by the time she realized how bad the weather had become, it was too late to safely walk home. Joseph insisted she stay. A place was made for her in Morning Star's lodge, a pile of furs near the fire that was surprisingly warm and comfortable. Kate lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl outside, to the breathing of the people around her. She had not slept in the presence of others since Thomas died. It felt strange and oddly comforting. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to find the storm past and morning light filtering through the smoke hole. The fire had burned down to embers. Everyone else was still asleep. Kate slipped outside, needing air and privacy. The world was transformed by snow. Fresh drifts had piled against the lodges, sculpting new shapes in the landscape. The sky was clear, hard, and bright. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Joseph approaching, carrying 2 tin cups that steamed in the cold air. "Coffee," he said, offering her one, "or what passes for it here." Kate accepted gratefully. The liquid was hot and bitter and barely resembled actual coffee, but it was warm. They stood together in silence, watching the sun rise over the mountains to the east. After a while, Joseph spoke. "I need to tell you something about your husband." Kate's hands tightened on the cup. "Thomas." Joseph reached into his coat and pulled out something small, holding it out to her. A pocket watch, silver, with ornate engraving on the case. Kate recognized it instantly. She had given it to Thomas on their 5th wedding anniversary, saved for months to afford it. Her hands shook as she took it. "Where did you get this?" "From him. From Thomas. The night he died." The world seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about? Thomas died in a mine collapse 18 months ago." "No," Joseph said quietly. "He didn't." And then he told her the truth. The whole truth, piece by piece, like stones placed carefully to build a wall. 18 months ago, Thomas had been working at the silver mine on the outskirts of Salvation Ridge. He had been well liked by the other miners, respected for his fairness and his willingness to stand up for what was right. When the mine owners had started cutting corners on safety, paying less for longer hours, demanding more ore for less pay, Thomas had been one of the first to speak up. He and 5 other men had organized a strike. Nothing violent, nothing revolutionary, just a refusal to work until conditions improved. The mine owners had pretended to negotiate. They had smiled and nodded and made promises. And then, 3 days into the strike, the mine had collapsed. 6 men inside, all dead, the company claimed. A tragic accident. A weakness in the support timbers that no one could have predicted, but it had not been an accident. Joseph knew this because he had been there. He had been hunting in the hills above the mine, tracking a deer. He had seen men approaching the mine entrance, 3 of them, including Silas Drummond. He had watched them enter, watched them emerge 20 minutes later. And then, an hour after they left, the explosion. Not a collapse. An explosion. Deliberate. Controlled. Murder disguised as misfortune. Joseph had gone down to investigate after the dust settled. He had found Thomas not in the mine, but in the forest a quarter-mile away. Beaten. Dying. The mine owners had pulled him out before setting the charges, but only to kill him more privately. Thomas had been barely conscious, blood bubbling from his lips. But he had seen Joseph, had recognized something in him, some quality he trusted. "Give this to my wife," Thomas had whispered, pressing the watch into Joseph's hand. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I tried to do right." Joseph had cradled Thomas as he died there in the snow under the pine trees. And then he had been faced with an impossible choice. Report what he had seen and be dismissed as a liar, or worse. The word of an Arapaho against white men like Drummond carried no weight. He would be ignored at best, arrested at worst. So he had kept silent. He had kept the watch, this small piece of evidence that proved nothing and meant everything. He had carried the guilt of that silence for 18 months. "I should have told someone," Joseph said, his voice raw. "I should have tried, but I was a coward." Kate could barely breathe. Her hands were numb around the watch. Drummond killed Thomas. Yes. And made it look like an accident. Yes. The world was too bright, too sharp. Every detail stood out with painful clarity, the way the snow sparkled in the sunlight, the sound of someone coughing in one of the lodges, the smell of wood smoke on the cold air. "The other 5 men," Kate said. "Were they in the mine when it exploded?" "They died instantly." 6 murders, 6 families destroyed, all so the mine owners could break a strike and send a message to anyone else who might consider standing up for themselves. Kate looked down at the watch in her hands. She opened the case with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph carefully cut to fit the space. Thomas and Julia together, taken 2 years before everything fell apart. They were smiling. They looked happy. "Why are you telling me this now?" Kate asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because—" Joseph hesitated. "Because after what you did for Nady, for Little Hawk, I could not keep carrying this lie. You have given us so much. The least I owe you is honesty." Kate closed the watch case and held it tight. Part of her wanted to scream. Part of her wanted to march straight to Salvation Ridge and shoot Silas Drummond in the street. Part of her wanted to collapse into the snow and never get up. But what she did was take a deep breath and look Joseph in the eye. "Thank you," she said, "for being with him, for making sure he didn't die alone." Joseph's eyes widened slightly. "You're not angry at me for not speaking up. You did what you could. More than that, really. You risked staying with him when you could have run. You kept this watch safe for 18 months, waiting for the right time to return it." Kate's voice hardened. "My anger is for the men who killed him, and they will answer for what they did. How there is no proof, just the word of an Arapaho who was hunting where he should not have been. Then we'll find proof, or we'll make them confess. I don't know how yet, but I will make sure Thomas and those other men get justice." The determination in her voice surprised them both. For 18 months, Kate had been drifting through life like a ghost, But now, holding the watch that Thomas had carried in his last moments, she felt something ignite inside her. Purpose, direction, a reason to fight. "You cannot do this alone," Joseph said. "I know. That's why I'm glad I have help." Over the next 2 weeks, a transformation occurred at Kate's farmstead, subtle at first, but growing more obvious with each passing day. The 5 brothers had begun spending more time there, no longer just escorting Kate to and from the reservation. They repaired things. The sagging porch step that Kate had been meaning to fix for months. The fence that had broken in a windstorm and never been properly mended. The chimney that had developed a crack and filled the house with smoke. They did not ask permission. They simply did the work and then faded back to their camp as if they had never been there. Kate would wake to find fresh meat hanging in her smokehouse, or a cord of firewood neatly stacked by her door, or the water pump that had been freezing every night suddenly working smoothly again. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Kate began to reciprocate. She would cook more food than she needed and leave the surplus in a pot halfway between her house and their camp. She would mend their clothes when they tore. She would teach Nadie to read and write using Julia's old primers, the 2 of them sitting at Kate's kitchen table while afternoon light slanted through the windows. The invisible line between her world and theirs began to blur. On the 18th day, Kate invited them all inside for supper. It was a simple meal, just venison stew and bread, but it was the first time they had all eaten together under her roof. They sat around her table, 6 adults and 2 children, passing bowls and cups, speaking in a mixture of English and Arapaho. After the meal, they sat by the fire. Little Hawk, now fully recovered, curled up against his father's side and fell asleep. Nadie practiced her letters on a slate. The twins played some complicated game with pebbles and sticks that Kate did not understand, but found oddly soothing to watch. Samuel sat in the corner, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. His scarred hands moved with surprising delicacy, coaxing beauty from rough material. William paced, unable to sit still for long. His restless energy filled the room, and Kate sat across from Joseph, the 2 of them watching the fire in companionable silence. It was William who broke the peace. He had been outside to check on the horses and came back in with snow on his shoulders and alarm in his eyes. "There are men watching the house," he said in a low voice, 2 of them, maybe 3, on the ridge to the south. Joseph was on his feet instantly. "How far?" "Far enough that they think they're hidden. Close enough to count how many horses we have." Samuel set down his whittling. The twins stopped their game. Even Nadie looked up, sensing the sudden tension. "Drummond?" Kate said flatly. It was not a question. "Probably," Joseph agreed. "He knows we're here. He knows we've been helping you. And he knows—" He glanced at Kate. "He knows I know the truth about Thomas," Kate finished. "Or he suspects it anyway." William's hand went to the knife at his belt. "We should go out there, deal with them." "No," Joseph said firmly. "That's what he wants. An excuse to claim we attacked white men. Then he can bring the marshal down on all of us." "So we just wait." William's frustration was evident. "Let them watch. Let them plan." Kate stood up, her mind racing. She had been passive for too long, first in her grief, then in her isolation. But she was done being passive. "We don't wait," she said. "We act first." Everyone turned to look at her. "There's a territorial marshal in Helena," Kate continued, thinking it through as she spoke. "About 200 miles from here. If we can get evidence to him, real evidence of what Drummond did, he'll have to investigate." "What evidence?" Joseph asked. "The watch proves nothing except that I was there when Thomas died. Drummond could claim I killed him. Then we need more. We need testimony from someone Drummond trusts, someone who might have seen something or heard something or knows something." Kate paused. "We need to find the other men who were with Drummond that night." Before anyone could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Everyone froze. The knock came again, gentle but insistent. Kate moved to the door and opened it a crack. Standing outside was a woman she recognized but had never spoken to. Agnes Porter, one of the few women in Salvation Ridge who ran her own business. She operated a small boarding house and served as the town's only trained nurse, having worked in field hospitals during the war. "Mrs. Mercer," Agnes said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Kate glanced back at Joseph, who nodded. She opened the door wider and let Agnes inside. The older woman looked around at the gathered Arapaho, her eyes widening slightly, but she did not comment. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded packet of papers. "I know what happened to your husband," Agnes said without preamble. "I've known for months, and I can't stay silent anymore." She unfolded the papers on Kate's table, medical documents, diagrams of injuries, and photographs crude but clear enough showing wounds that could not have come from a mine collapse. "I was the one who examined the bodies when they brought them up," Agnes explained. "All 6 men. The others showed crushing injuries, burns from the explosion. But Thomas—" She pointed to one of the photographs. "These wounds were made by a weapon, an axe or a heavy club. I documented everything, took these pictures without telling anyone. I knew it was murder, but I was too afraid to speak up." Kate stared at the evidence spread before her. Here it was. Proof. Real, tangible proof. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come forward now?" Agnes met her eyes. "Because I saw what you did for that girl in the square, and I realized that if you could be brave enough to take a whipping for a stranger, I could be brave enough to tell the truth, even if it costs me everything." The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Then Joseph spoke. "This changes everything. With these documents, a marshal would have to investigate." "But Helena is 200 miles away," Samuel said, "and winter is here. The roads will be impassable soon." "I know someone," Agnes said. "A Pony Express rider. He owes me a favor. For the right price, he could make it to Helena in 2 weeks, even in winter. He knows the back trails." Kate looked around at the faces gathered in her home. The 5 brothers who had pledged themselves to her protection, Nadie, who had become like a daughter, Agnes, who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. And in that moment, Kate made her decision. "We send the letter," she said. "We tell the marshal everything. We ask him to come and investigate. And while we wait for him to arrive, we prepare for Drummond to make his move." "He will come for you," Joseph said. "Once he realizes you're a threat, he'll try to silence you." "Let him try," Kate said, and there was iron in her voice. "I'm not running, and I'm not hiding, not anymore." William smiled a fierce expression that was part grimace and part grin. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." They spent the rest of the evening planning. Agnes would contact her writer friend and give him the documents along with a detailed letter from Kate explaining everything. The 5 brothers would take turns watching the farmstead, making sure Drummond's men did not attempt anything while they waited for the marshal's response. Kate would continue her daily routine as much as possible, refusing to show any sign that she knew she was being watched. It was late when everyone finally prepared to leave. Agnes slipped away first, her small form disappearing quickly into the darkness. The brothers gathered their things more slowly. At the door, Joseph paused. "What you're doing, standing against Drummond like this, it's dangerous. Are you certain?" Kate thought of Thomas dying in the snow. She thought of Julia fading away in that small bedroom. She thought of all the months she had spent as a ghost, barely alive, going through the motions of existence without truly living. "I've never been more certain of anything," she said. Joseph nodded slowly. Then, in a gesture that surprised them both, he reached out and clasped her hand briefly. "Then we stand with you," he said, "whatever comes." After they left, Kate sat alone by her fire, turning the pocket watch over and over in her hands. She opened it one more time, looking at the picture of Thomas and Julia. "I'm going to get justice for you," she whispered to the photograph. "I promise." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the tracks in the yard, erasing evidence of the gathering that had just taken place. But inside Kate's farmstead, something had shifted fundamentally. She was no longer alone. She was no longer merely surviving. She was preparing for war. And when Silas Drummond came for her, as he inevitably would, he would find not a broken widow, but a woman with purpose, with allies, with a cause worth fighting for. The wait had begun, and with it, the slow gathering of a storm that would soon break over Salvation Ridge with the force of a reckoning too long delayed. The waiting was worse than the whipping had been. 10 days passed after Agnes sent the letter to Helena. 10 days of watching the horizon for riders who never came. 10 days of seeing Drummond's men on the ridge, dark shapes against the snow, counting and watching and planning. 10 days of sleeping with one ear open, a loaded rifle beside the bed, wondering if tonight would be the night they came. Kate had thought she understood patience. She had spent 9 months in isolation, after all locked in her grief like a prisoner in a cell of her own making. But that had been passive waiting, the empty passage of time that meant nothing. This was different. This was waiting for violence, for confrontation, for a reckoning that grew more inevitable with each passing hour. The brothers had established a rotation. 2 of them were always nearby, one watching the approaches to the farmstead, the other ready to ride for help if needed. They moved through the snow like ghosts, visible one moment and gone the next, their presence both comforting and unsettling. Kate had never had protectors before. The vulnerability of needing them sat uneasily alongside the gratitude she felt for their loyalty. On the 8th day, Little Hawk came to visit with his father. The boy had recovered completely, his cheeks full of color, his eyes bright with the boundless energy of childhood. He brought Kate a drawing. He had made a crude but charming picture of a woman with dark hair standing between 2 groups of people, her arms outstretched as if to embrace them all. "It's you," Little Hawk said shyly. "You're the bridge, that's what Papa says. You're the bridge between our people and yours." Kate had no words for the emotion that rose in her throat as she accepted the drawing. She hung it on her wall next to the small mirror and the hooks where Thomas's coat had once hung. When Joseph saw it, something in his expression softened. "He's not wrong," Joseph said quietly. "You have become something rare in this territory, a place where both worlds can meet without fear." But fear was coming. They all knew it. The question was only when and how it would arrive. The answer came on the 11th night in the darkest hours before dawn, when sleep was deepest and the cold most bitter. William was on watch, positioned in the small barn where he had a clear view of the main approach to the farmstead. He had been there since midnight, wrapped in furs against the cold, his bow strung and ready at his side. The moon was setting, painting the snow in shades of silver and black. Nothing moved in the landscape except the wind stirring up small devils of powder. Then he saw them, shadows at first barely distinguishable from the darkness, then shapes. Then men on horses, more than a dozen of them, spreading out as they approached. They were trying to be quiet, but horses in snow cannot move in complete silence. William heard the crunch of hooves, the creak of leather, the low murmur of voices giving orders. He was moving before conscious thought, slipping from the barn like water through fingers. He reached the house in seconds, his hand pounding on the door in the rhythm they had agreed upon. 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 more. Danger approaching. Kate was awake instantly, her months of light sleeping serving her well. She rose from bed fully clothed, having learned to sleep in her dress for exactly this possibility. By the time William burst through the door, she had the rifle in her hands. 18 men, William said, his breath coming fast. Maybe 20, armed, coming from the south. Joseph materialized from the shadows where he had been sleeping near the fire. Samuel emerged from the small room where Kate stored supplies, his massive frame blocking the doorway. The twins appeared at the back entrance, having circled around from their watch position. "Nady?" Kate asked. "Safe in the reservation," Joseph said. "Little Hawk, too. I sent them back yesterday, when the watchers on the ridge increased to 4. So, he had known this was coming. They all had, really. The only surprise was that it had taken Drummond this long to act. Joseph moved with quick efficiency, positioning his brothers. "Samuel, you take the front. William, you and I will cover the sides. Twins watch the back in case they try to circle around." "And me?" Kate asked. Joseph looked at her for a long moment. "You stay inside. If they breach the defenses, you're the last line." "No," Kate said flatly. "This is my fight as much as yours, more even. Thomas was my husband." "Which is exactly why you need to survive this," Joseph countered. "Someone needs to tell the marshal what happened here if things go badly." Before Kate could argue further, a voice called out from the darkness, loud enough to carry across the snow. "Kate Mercer, I know you're awake in there. Come out and we can settle this peacefully." Drummond. Of course it was Drummond. Kate recognized the false heartiness in his voice, the tone of a man who enjoyed his own authority too much. She moved to the window, staying to the side where she would not be silhouetted against the lamplight inside. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see the men arrayed in a loose semicircle around her farmstead. Drummond sat his horse in the center, a heavy coat making his bulk even more imposing. Torches burned in the hands of several men, casting jumping shadows across the snow. Kate's hands were steady as she opened the window a crack, letting in a blast of frigid air. "There's nothing to settle, Drummond," she called back. "Go home. You're trespassing." A laugh rippled through the assembled men. Drummond leaned forward in his saddle. "Trespassing. That's rich coming from a woman harboring savages. We've come to collect them, Mrs. Mercer. Hand over those Indians, and you can go back to your widowhood in peace. They're my guests, under my protection. You have no authority to demand anything." "I have all the authority I need right here," Drummond said, patting the rifle across his saddle. "This is white man's land, Mrs. Mercer. Those Arapaho don't belong here, and neither do you if you insist on sheltering them." Kate felt Joseph move up beside her in the darkness. His presence was solid, reassuring. She drew strength from it. "I know what you did, Drummond," Kate said, her voice carrying clearly through the cold air. "I know you killed my husband. I know about the mine, about the murder you made look like an accident. And I have proof, real proof. Evidence that's already on its way to the territorial marshal in Helena." The change in Drummond was immediate and visible even at this distance. His posture stiffened. The jovial mask dropped away, revealing something harder beneath. "You lying witch," he snarled. "Thomas died in a collapse. Everyone knows that." "Everyone knows what you wanted them to know," Kate shot back. "But I have medical documents, photographs, testimony from witnesses. The marshal will see it all. He's probably already received it. You're done, Drummond. Turn around and go home while you still can." For a moment nothing happened. The men shifted in their saddles, looking at each other, at Drummond, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Then Drummond's face twisted into something ugly. "The marshal," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You stupid woman. Helena is 200 miles away through winter roads, even if you sent a letter, which I doubt it'll be spring before anyone reads it. And by then you'll be gone, vanished. Just another widow who couldn't handle the territory and left in the night." He raised his voice, addressing his men. "She's a liar and a traitor. She's turned her back on her own kind to side with savages. We're going to drag those Indians out and teach them what happens to cattle thieves and squatters. And if Mrs. Mercer tries to stop us, well, that's her choice." Kate saw him reach for his rifle, saw the motion ripple through the other men as they prepared to advance. Time seemed to slow each moment, stretching out like taffy. She saw Joseph tense beside her, heard Samuel's deep breathing from the front room, felt the weight of the rifle in her own hands. Then William moved. He was through the door before anyone could stop him. His bow-drawn an arrow knocked. The string sang, and the arrow flew a dark streak against the snow. It caught one of Drummond's men in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle with a cry of pain. "That's a warning," William shouted. "The next one goes through someone's throat." Chaos erupted. The men scattered, some dismounting others, trying to control horses spooked by the sudden violence. Drummond was shouting orders, his voice high and urgent. More arrows flew from William's bow, forcing men to take cover behind their horses, behind the water trough, behind anything solid. Samuel burst through the front door with a roar that seemed too large to come from any human throat. He charged straight at the nearest cluster of men, his fists swinging like hammers. Kate saw him grab one man by the coat and physically throw him into two others, all three going down in a tangle of limbs. The twins had circled around to the side, and now they struck from an unexpected angle, using the terrain and shadows to make it seem like there were more defenders than there actually were. Men fired rifles at shadows, wasting ammunition on echoes and tricks of the light. But there were too many of them. For every man William pinned down with arrow fire, two more advanced. For every attacker, Samuel scattered three more, came around the flanks. The mathematics of the fight were brutally simple. 5 men, no matter how skilled or determined, could not hold off 20 for long. Kate saw the moment when the tide began to turn. One of Drummond's men made it to the barn and disappeared inside. Seconds later, smoke began to pour from the structure. They had set it on fire. "Fall back," Joseph shouted. "To the house now!" William was the last to retreat, covering his brother's withdrawal with steady arrow fire. He was 20 feet from the door when Kate saw the man step from behind the well rifle, raised, aiming at Samuel's broad back. She screamed a warning, but William was already moving. He threw himself sideways, putting his own body between the gunman and his brother. The rifle cracked impossibly loud in the cold air. William stumbled, his hand going to his stomach. For a moment he stood there, swaying, his face a mask of surprise. Then his legs folded, and he went down into the snow. Samuel's bellow of rage shook the night. He changed direction mid-stride, charging toward the man who had fired. But Joseph was faster, tackling his brother, dragging him toward the house, even as Samuel fought to break free. Kate was already moving, her medical instincts overriding her fear. She reached William a heartbeat before the twins did. Together they grabbed him under the arms and hauled him toward the house, his feet dragging twin furrows in the blood-stained snow. They made it inside just as bullets began to slam into the wooden walls. Kate kicked the door shut and dropped the bar across it. William was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid, blood spreading across his shirt in a dark stain. "Table," Kate snapped, falling back on the authority she had learned from tending Julia. "Put him on the table. I need light, lots of light. And water, clean water." They moved in organized chaos, following her orders without question. Samuel brought lamps, his hands shaking as he lit them. The twins heated water over the fire. Joseph tore strips from a clean sheet for bandages. Kate cut away William's shirt with scissors from her sewing kit, exposing the wound. The bullet had entered just below his ribs on the right side, angling upward. She probed gently, her fingers slick with blood, searching for the exit wound. Relief flooded through her when she found it. The bullet had passed through, missing the vital organs by what must have been less than an inch. "He's going to live," she said, and heard the collective exhale around her. "But he's lost blood, and the wound needs to be cleaned and stitched. Samuel, I need you to hold him still. This is going to hurt." She worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made William jerk and moan even in his unconscious state. She stitched carefully, tiny, neat stitches that would minimize scarring. She bound the wound with clean bandages and elevated his feet to help with the blood loss. All the while, bullets continued to slam into the walls outside. Men shouted, horses screamed, and through the window Kate could see the barn fully engulfed, now flames reaching toward the sky, the heat so intense that the snow around it melted into mud. "They're going to burn us out," Daniel said, stating the obvious. "They're going to try," Kate corrected. She moved to the window, rifle in hand. "But this house is stone foundation with thick log walls. It won't burn easily, and they can't get close enough with torches without exposing themselves to our fire." Joseph joined her at the window. His face was grim. "We can hold them off for a while, but eventually they'll either overwhelm us or we'll run out of ammunition." "Then we need to make sure neither of those things happens," Kate said. She took aim at a man trying to creep closer with a torch and fired. The rifle's kick against her shoulder was familiar now, almost comforting. The man yelped and dove for cover, his torch falling harmlessly into the snow. They settled into a rhythm. Take turns at the windows. Conserve ammunition. Protect the vulnerable points. It was a siege, and both sides knew it. Drummond had numbers and resources. Kate and the brothers had fortification and determination. An hour passed, then another. William regained consciousness, his eyes glazed with pain, but alert. "Did I get him?" he asked weakly. "You saved your brother," Kate told him. "That's what matters." Felt like the right thing to do. William managed a wan smile. "Dying for family. That's a good death." "You're not dying," Kate said firmly. "I won't allow it." Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming, and with it, Kate hoped some change in the standoff. Drummond's men had to be cold and tired. Some of them had to be questioning whether this was worth it. As if summoned by her thoughts, Drummond's voice rang out again. "You can't win this, Mercer. Give up now, and I'll let you live. You have my word." Kate's laugh was bitter. "Your word? The word of a murderer? I'd sooner trust a snake. Then you'll die in there, all of you. I'll burn that house down around your ears." "Try it," Kate shouted back. "But know this, Drummond. Even if you kill us all, the truth is already out there. The marshal knows what you did. Killing me won't change that." A silence followed her words. Then Drummond's voice came again, lower now, almost conversational. "I already killed 6 men to protect my interests, Mrs. Mercer. What's 5 more? What's one stubborn widow? You think anyone will care? You think anyone will even remember?" Kate felt rage surge through her, hot and clarifying. She set down the rifle and picked up Thomas's Winchester, the weapon he had taught her to shoot years ago on lazy Sunday afternoons when they had been young and happy and thought they had all the time in the world. "I'll remember," Kate said quietly, but loud enough to carry, "and so will God." She moved to the door before Joseph could stop her. Her hands worked the bar, lifting it free. "Kate, no!" Joseph grabbed her arm. She looked at him with eyes like ice. "He killed my husband. He tried to kill my family. This ends now." She stepped onto the porch. Drummond sat his horse 30 feet away, rifle across his saddle, surrounded by his remaining men. The barn was still burning behind him, painting everything in shades of orange and red. Kate raised the Winchester and fired. The bullet struck the ground 2 inches from Drummond's horse's front hoof. The animal reared, nearly throwing him. "The next one goes through your heart," Kate said, her voice cold and clear as winter air. "You murdered Thomas. You murdered 5 other innocent men. You tried to murder me and everyone I care about. Draw your weapon if you dare." Drummond's face went white, then red. For the first time he saw not a grieving widow, but a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. His hand moved toward his rifle. Kate's finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to stop. She could hear her own heartbeat loud in her ears, could see Drummond's hand inching toward the weapon, could feel the weight of the rifle, the cold of the trigger beneath her finger. And that was when they heard it. Hoofbeats. Real ones this time, coming fast from the east from the direction of the main road. The rider who appeared out of the dawn was tall in the saddle, wearing a long coat and a badge that caught the first rays of sun. Behind him came 6 more mounted men, all armed, all wearing the same grim expressions. U.S. Marshal James Crawford had arrived. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. The burning barn, the armed men surrounding a farmstead, the woman on the porch with a rifle pointed at Silas Drummond, the bullet holes in the walls. What in the name of God is going on here? His voice carried the weight of law of federal authority that trumped all local power. Drummond tried to rally. "Marshal Crawford, thank goodness you're here. This woman has been harboring criminals, Indians who've been stealing livestock and threatening decent folk. We came to arrest them, and she opened fire." Crawford's eyes moved to the farmstead, to the defensive positions, to the evidence of the siege. Then they moved to Kate. "Ma'am, is that true?" Kate lowered the rifle slowly. "That man is a liar and a murderer. He killed 6 men 18 months ago and made it look like an accident. He came here tonight to kill me because I have proof of what he did." Crawford dismounted slowly. He pulled a packet of papers from his saddlebag and unfolded them. Kate recognized Agnes's handwriting, her own words, the medical documents. "I received a very detailed letter 10 days ago," Crawford said, his voice carrying to everyone present. "It made some serious accusations. I decided to investigate personally rather than send a deputy." He looked at Drummond. "Silas Drummond, you are under arrest for the murders of Thomas Mercer, Robert Henshaw, John Kelly, Patrick O'Brien, Samuel Chen, and Michael Donovan." Drummond's face went white. "You can't arrest me. You have no proof, just the ravings of a grieving widow and some photographs that could show anything. I have medical testimony from a trained nurse. I have physical evidence. I have witness statements." Crawford gestured to his deputies. "And I have authority. You can come peacefully or you can resist. Your choice." For a moment, Kate thought Drummond might actually fight. His hand moved toward his rifle, but Crawford was faster, his revolver clearing leather with practiced ease. "Don't," the marshal said quietly. "Don't make this worse." The fight went out of Drummond all at once. His shoulders sagged. His men, seeing their leader defeated, began to disperse, some dropping weapons, others simply riding away as fast as their horses would carry them. Crawford's deputies moved in, securing Drummond's hands with iron cuffs. As they led him past the farmstead, the murderer looked up at the porch where Kate stood. "You destroyed me," he said, his voice hollow. Kate's response was cold and clear. "No, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone else knew it." As Drummond was led away, Crawford approached the house. Kate descended from the porch, the rifle still in her hands, but pointed safely at the ground. The marshal took off his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Mercer, I apologize for not arriving sooner. The weather slowed us down." "How did you get here at all?" Kate asked. "We only sent the letter 10 days ago." Crawford smiled slightly. "Miss Porter is a resourceful woman. She sent 3 letters by 3 different routes and paid premium rates for express delivery. One of them reached me in 4 days. I left Helena immediately." Kate turned to see Agnes emerging from the shadows where she had been hiding with the other women from town. The older woman's face was tired but triumphant. "I wasn't taking any chances," Agnes said. Kate looked at her, at all the women standing in her yard in the cold dawn light. Mrs. Henderson, Mary Sullivan, Ruth Carmichael. Dozens more she recognized from town. They had come. They had stood between her and violence. They had demanded justice. "Thank you," Kate said, and her voice broke on the words. "All of you, thank you." The next weeks passed in a blur of official proceedings and community attention that Kate found both overwhelming and oddly comforting. The territorial judge came to Salvation Ridge to conduct the trial, not wanting to risk moving Drummond to Helena, where he might have opportunities to escape or intimidate witnesses. The evidence was presented carefully and thoroughly. Agnes testified about the wounds she had documented. Joseph testified about what he had witnessed in the forest. Kate testified about the watch, about the lies, about 18 months of grief based on a murder disguised as accident. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. The sentence was 20 years in the territorial prison, a lifetime for a man of Drummond's age and health. The mine owners who had hired Drummond to break the strike were also implicated. They settled out of court, paying substantial sums to the families of the dead men. Kate received $500 more money than she had seen in her entire life. She sat in her kitchen, looking at the bank draft, feeling nothing like triumph. The money could not bring Thomas back. It could not restore the time she had lost to grief. But it could secure her future, and perhaps more importantly, it could help others. William recovered slowly, his youth and strength serving him well. Within 3 weeks, he was walking again, though he tired easily, and the wound still pained him. He bore the scar with a strange pride, showing it off to little Hawk, and telling the story with increasing dramatic embellishment each time. "I flew through the air like an eagle," he told the boy, who listened with wide eyes. "I saw the bullet coming, and I knew Samuel was in danger, so I moved faster than thought itself." "You stumbled and fell in front of it," Samuel corrected dryly, but there was affection in his voice. The day after the trial concluded, Joseph came to Kate's farmstead with his brothers. They stood in her yard, their expression serious, and Kate felt her heart sink. She knew what they had come to say. "You're leaving," she said before they could speak. Joseph nodded. "The debt has been paid, more than paid. Drummond is in prison. You're safe. There's no reason for us to stay anymore." Kate looked at them, at Joseph with his scarred face and his quiet dignity, at Samuel with his gentle eyes and his careful strength, at William still favoring his wounded side but grinning anyway, at the twins who had become as comfortable in her home as they were in their own camp. "What if I don't want you to go?" The words came out before she could stop them. They stared at her. Joseph's eyes widened. "You want us to stay? This farmstead is too big for one person," Kate said, the arguments forming even as she spoke them. "I have money now. We could expand, build proper houses, plant a larger garden in the spring. There's work enough for everyone and—" She trailed off, not sure how to say what she really meant. "And," Joseph prompted gently. Kate took a breath. "And I don't want to be alone anymore. These past weeks, having people here, having purpose, having family, even a family that's not bound by blood, it's made me feel alive again for the first time since Thomas and Julia died. I know I have no right to ask you to stay. I know you have your own lives, your own plans. But if you wanted to, if you thought you could build something here, then I would like that very much." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then William spoke, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I want to stay. If my brothers agree, I want to stay." Samuel nodded slowly. "I stay too. Good place here. Good work. Good people." The twins exchanged one of their wordless conversations. Then Daniel said, "We've talked about this before you asked. We hoped you would ask. We want to stay." All eyes turned to Joseph. He was the leader, the one who made the final decisions. His face was unreadable. "My son," he said slowly, "Little Hawk. He needs a home, somewhere stable, somewhere he can grow up safely." "He would have that here," Kate said. "I could teach him, teach all the children. There must be others in the reservation who would benefit from schooling." Joseph looked at his brothers, then back at Kate. "When we pledged ourselves to you, it was supposed to be a debt of honor. Temporary. Until you were safe. I know. But it has become something else, hasn't it? Something more than duty." Kate nodded. "Yes, it has become family." Joseph smiled then, a real smile that transformed his stern features. "Then we stay, not as servants or guards, but as partners, as family, if that's agreeable to you." "It's more than agreeable," Kate said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's everything I could hope for." The months that followed were a time of transformation. With the $500 from the settlement and contributions from the brothers, they began to expand the farmstead. Samuel's strength and skill with tools proved invaluable as they built 2 new cabins, one for Joseph and Little Hawk, another for William and the twins to share. Agnes came to visit frequently, often bringing women from town who were curious about the unusual household Kate had created. What started as suspicious observation slowly turned into something like acceptance. Kate began teaching first just Little Hawk and Nadie, then other children from the reservation, and eventually even a few from town whose parents were willing to look past convention for the sake of education. Samuel found his confidence growing as he worked the land alongside the others. He discovered he had a gift for coaxing life from soil in the garden that had barely sustained Kate through previous winters, flourished under his care. More importantly, he found people who looked at his scars and saw only evidence of survival, not marks of monstrosity. William's anger, which had burned so hot for so long, found healthier outlets. He trained Little Hawk in the use of the bow, teaching the boy patience and precision. He hunted to provide for the growing household, and slowly, painfully, he learned to let go of his need for revenge, finding that building something new was more satisfying than destroying something old. The twins flourished too, each finding his own voice, his own skills. Daniel proved to have a talent for languages and became an invaluable bridge between the Arapaho community and the townspeople. David discovered an aptitude for numbers and began keeping the accounts for their small farming operation with meticulous care. Nadie bloomed under Kate's tutelage, her quick mind soaking up knowledge like parched earth soaks up rain. The girl who had once stolen flour out of desperation now read Shakespeare and calculated mathematics and dreamed of perhaps becoming a teacher herself one day. And Kate, who had been so hollowed out by grief that she had felt like a ghost walking through her own life, found herself filled up again. Not with what she had lost, that space would always ache, but with something new, something different, but equally valuable. 6 months after Drummond's trial on a warm summer evening, when the sun hung low and golden over the mountains, Kate stood on her porch and surveyed the transformed landscape. The new cabins stood solid and welcoming. Smoke rose from their chimneys where evening meals were being prepared. The garden stretched in neat rows, heavy with vegetables that would feed them all through the coming winter. Chickens pecked in a new coop Samuel had built. Horses grazed in a pasture where the twins had repaired and extended the fencing. And everywhere there were people. Little Hawk playing with a wooden horse William had carved for him. Nadie reading under a tree, her lips moving silently as she worked through a difficult passage. Agnes sitting in a rocking chair on the porch knitting and keeping up a steady stream of conversation with Morning Star, who was teaching her the Arapaho words for the plants she used in her healing. Samuel emerged from the garden, his hands full of vegetables for supper. The twins were checking the horses, their movements synchronized without thought. William was showing a group of children how to track animals by their signs in the dirt. And Joseph stood a little apart watching his family with an expression of deep contentment. Kate descended the porch steps and walked to where he stood. For a moment they simply stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked. "Staying here, binding your life to mine?" Joseph considered the question seriously, as he did all questions. "Regret, no. This is not the life I imagined when I was young, but it is a good life, an honorable life. My son is safe and happy. My brothers have purpose. Nadie thrives." He paused. "And I have found something I did not know I was looking for." "What's that?" "Peace." Kate nodded, understanding. She had found the same thing, though she had not been looking for it either. Later that evening, after the meal had been eaten and the dishes cleaned and Little Hawk put to bed, Kate went to her bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept her most precious possessions. Thomas's pocket watch was there, along with a few letters he had written her during their courtship and a lock of Julia's hair tied with a ribbon. She took out the watch and held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight. Opening the case, she looked at the photograph of Thomas and Julia together, forever frozen in a moment of happiness. "I did it," she told them softly. "I got justice for you, Thomas, and I found a way to keep living, Julia. Not by forgetting you or replacing you, but by making space for new love alongside the old." She thought she could feel their approval, though perhaps that was only wishful thinking. Either way, it brought comfort. "I wish you could see this place now," she continued. "It's not what we planned, you and I, not the quiet life we imagined, but it's good, it's full, and I think you would approve." A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Joseph stood there hesitant. "I saw your light still burning. I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am," Kate said, and realized it was true. "I was just talking to them, to Thomas and Julia, telling them about everything that's happened." Joseph entered the room slowly, respectfully, as if aware he was entering sacred space. He sat in the chair by the window, the same chair Thomas had used when he read his newspapers in the evening. "Do you think they would approve?" Joseph asked. "Of this arrangement of us?" Kate smiled. "I think Thomas would like you very much. He always respected men of principle. And Julia," her voice caught, "Julia would have loved Little Hawk. She always wanted siblings." They sat in companionable silence as the room grew darker. Finally, Joseph rose to leave. "Thank you," he said at the door, "for giving us a home, for seeing past the boundaries that divide our peoples, for being brave enough to love again." After he left, Kate returned to the window and looked out at the compound, at the lights in the other cabins, at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Mercy and justice, she realized, were not opposites, but partners. Family was not blood, but choice. The future stretched before her, no longer empty, but full of possibility. She closed the watch and held it against her heart. "I love you both," she whispered. "I will always love you. But I'm ready now. Ready to let the grief be just one part of my life instead of all of it. Ready to build something new on the foundation of what we had." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Kate woke early, as was her habit, and stepped out onto the porch. The valley was still mostly in shadow, but the first rays of sun were touching the peaks of the distant mountains, turning them gold. Joseph was already up, sitting on a bench he had built near the well. Little Hawk slept curled against his father's side, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. Kate brought them coffee, the real kind this time, purchased with her settlement money. Joseph accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "Beautiful morning," he said. "Yes," Kate agreed. "The first day of the rest of our lives." He smiled at that. Poetic. "Julia's influence," Kate said. "She loved poetry, used to recite it to me while I cooked dinner." "Tell me about her," Joseph said. "Not about her dying, but about her living. What made her laugh? What did she dream about?" So Kate told him. And in the telling, Julia came alive again, not as a source of pain, but as a joyful memory to be shared. Joseph listened, asking questions, drawing out stories that Kate had thought too painful to revisit. Little Hawk woke and listened too, his young face solemn. When Kate finished, he said, "She sounds nice. I wish I could have met her." "I wish you could have too," Kate said. "I think you would have been good friends." The boy considered this. "Maybe we can still be friends, even though she's gone. Maybe I can be friends with her memory." Kate felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, I think she would like that very much." As the sun rose higher, the rest of the household began to stir. Smoke rose from chimneys. The smell of cooking food drifted through the air. Voices called greetings. The business of the day began. But Kate stayed on the porch for a few more minutes, soaking in the moment. She thought about how far she had come from the broken woman who had taken a whipping in the snow. How much had changed in just 6 months. She thought about the future stretching out before her with possibilities she had never imagined. Children to teach, land to cultivate, a community to build, a life to live fully instead of merely endure. "Mrs. Mercer," Agnes's voice called from the path. The older woman was approaching with her medical bag, coming to check on William's healing wound, as she did every few days. Kate waved. "Good morning, Agnes. Coffee." "Always," Agnes said with a smile. As Kate went inside to pour another cup, she paused at the small table by the door where she had hung Little Hawk's drawing. The woman with dark hair, arms outstretched, standing between two groups of people. A bridge, the boy had called her. A connection between worlds. She touched the drawing lightly, then moved to pour the coffee. Behind her, through the open door, she could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of life being lived in all its messy, complicated, beautiful fullness. And Catherine Mercer, who had once wanted nothing more than to be left alone with her grief, smiled. She had taken 10 lashes for a stranger. In return, she had received a family. Not the family she had been born into or married into, but the family she had chosen and been chosen by. A family forged in winter's harshness and tempered by shared struggle. A family that crossed boundaries and defied expectations. A family built on the radical foundation of mercy and mutual respect. It was not the life she had planned, but it was, she realized, exactly the life she needed. Kate carried the coffee out to Agnes and settled into her chair, ready for whatever this new day might bring. Ready to teach and learn, to build and grow, to love and be loved. Ready at last to to truly live. And somewhere she liked to think Thomas and Julia were watching, approving, smiling at the life she had built from the ashes of the one she had lost. The sun climbed higher, the day grew warm, and in a small farmstead on the edge of Salvation Ridge, Wyoming territory, a family that should not have existed by any conventional standard gathered around a breakfast table and gave thanks for the meal and for each other. This was redemption, not found in a church or a town or a name on a map, but in the daily choice to extend mercy, to seek justice, to build bridges across divides. This was home, and it was enough. The end.